Good morning, everybody. David, thank you for the nice introduction. I think we planned 2 trips to Hungary, and neither one has worked. So a third time is the charm, I think. I'm really happy to be here. This is a milestone for Lean and Green. We are kicking off the Lean and Green program in many countries now. Portugal, Austria, and now Hungary. It's grand to see that we're growing. And just to add on what David just mentioned is we have requests now from England, from Sweden, from Croatia, but even outside Europe, from Canada and from Argentina this morning via the Dutch embassy. So we're growing, we're staying in Europe for now. We are thinking about Lean and Green Global, but that is a whole different story. I have prepared some slides for you today. I have, if we have time, a live demo just to see if that can work. If you will, please ask your questions in the chat. Then Anita can send them through to me. That would be great to make it more interactive. If I don't make sense or you have any questions, then please let me know. And if you want it to be translated to Hungarian, we have to have David because my Hungarian is really bad. Sorry for that. That being said, we're going to go to the next slide. David, please note if you can see the second screen.
Yes, I can see.
Oh, very good, very good, very good. Now, Lean and Green. I just saw the poll, and I fully support the poll. If you do not operate lean, if you do not reduce waste, if you do not save money, then there's no benefit. And you should become green by being more lean. I will show some examples of that later on. I forgot to introduce myself, sorry for that. I am Leon Simmons. I've been in logistics for the past 20 years. I've been from picking orders to director of operation, I've seen it all. I joined Lean and Green in 2010 as a participant. That meant we did the first 20% reduction in 2012, another 10% in 2014. And on 30 November 2015, I was asked to come to the Paris climate talk to speak on behalf of the companies, just for 8 minutes. But it was a life-changing event because I quit my job driving home. And since then, I've been in sustainable logistics. And Lean and Green is one of my projects that I work on full time. We have over 500 companies in Lean and Green now. And I can say out loud that I've spoken to more than 200 of them. I like to learn from the companies what they do. I will come back to later on about software we developed, also a request of these participants. But Lean and Green is a program for actual reduction of emissions by sharing our knowledge, by learning from each other, by collaboration, and we have seen great results. When you went to countries 4 or 5 years ago and you told them that they were going to achieve the climate goals, they would sit back and say, no, that's not possible, that's too ambitious, that's not moving. But it's doable. We see companies now do it. I will show some cases later on that can do it, but it all starts with one thing. You have to start. You have to begin by measuring your footprint. Know where you have your emissions. If you measure your emissions and you can actually see that per customer, then you can see where you're already doing a good job and where you have to improve. We have seen data sets of over 200 companies in Holland. And what we see in the 20% of their less efficient shipments to their customers, there's roughly 40% of the footprint. That means there's a huge gain to be had. If you can, please picture your own logistic bill for the company, and let's see if you can reduce it by 10, 20, 30, 40% to see what it does for your company in euros. If we look at what we call the factor 6 challenge, is our volume that we ship throughout Europe is growing. E-commerce is big. And if you look from a historical point and you project that up to 2015, then the volume will keep growing by 2.5, factor 2.5. But if you look at the Paris goals mean that you in absolute figures have to go back to 40% of your footprint. That means with the same liter of diesel, you have to transport 6 times as much volume. And at first, that does not seem doable. That's why we have this framework. And I know you already know about the framework, so I won't go into detail about that. But there are steps in this program. The first three steps, the first 3 stars, 20% reduction, 10% reduction, 5% reduction is a relative reduction. That means it's CO2 per pallet, or CO2 per cubic meter, or CO2 per unit, loading meter. After the first 3 stars, you have reduced more than 35% of your logistics, of your emissions. That can be in warehousing, that can be in logistics, but the total you have saved over 35% of your footprint. That meant that you have saved money, a lot of money. And if you reinvest a certain amount, a certain percentage of that, you can continue to improve. And that is what we see now in the 4th star. After 3 stars, you know where you are, and you know where the climate, the 5th star is. So you know exactly what the target is. And then if you tell a company like CHEP, you can tell them that they have to do 1.5% on absolute reduction per year, then all of a sudden it becomes achievable by different fuels, by more efficiency, by reducing empty running, by reducing kilometers. It becomes doable. That is something we would like to say to you. We have companies now, front runners in Holland, that have reduced their footprint by over 50%. They are on target for the Paris goals, and we see other companies look at them, learn from them, and actually getting there as well. You have to become more lean to become green. Enough about the program for now. If you want insight, if you want to know your emissions footprint, and I've seen the poll, over 60% wants to know their emission, 67 wants to reduce waste, and 72% wants to save money, then we first have to start with getting in the right data. Let's say that you're a shipper and you want, you know from where to where you have to ship, you know how much you ship, but you need fuel information or CO2 information from your logistics partner. And they have to share data with you. But the first step is share less data. The biggest mistake we made in Holland a couple of years ago is ask companies, please give me as much information as possible. And there's a lot of data exchange, and there's a lot of issues, legal issues, trust issues, and so on. So the only thing you would like to know from your logistics partner, let's say that you ship pallets, is what is your emissions per pallet, so I can calculate my own footprint. If I'm a logistics service provider, if I'm a transport company, it's relatively easy because you know your fuel, you know your energy. Now, if you know your volume, if you know your fuel, and you know your energy, you know your footprint already. And you can see already historically, how am I doing? Is the CO2 per pallet or the CO2 per ton, is that increasing or decreasing? If you want to take the next step, and that's what we see companies all throughout Europe doing now, is they start with volume, fuel, energy. And as soon as they know that, they go one step further and they go to shipment data, because they want to recalculate the emissions back to a certain customer. So knowing your total footprint, to going back to knowing your emissions on a one single day for one customer for one single shipment. We often joke the calculation of emissions is easy. It's fuel times emissions factor, energy times emission factor, and all is done. But the allocation of that, to do that in a way that's verifiable, that is agreed, that can be audited by third parties, then it becomes interesting. If we look, for instance, to our neighbors in Germany, they said in 2021, they're going to tax 25 euros per ton of CO2. That will go up to 65 euros in 2026. And all of a sudden, emissions become more interesting. All of a sudden, it will cost money. So now the game is on that everyone wants the correct data because nobody would like to pay taxes, at least as less as possible. And it has to be correct. We are talking here about primary data. From where, to where, how much, for who. And if I'm not mistaken, that we did when we already tried, we had a first meeting with our partner in Hungary. This is already data you have to share in the tax system, and I hope I've written it down well. It's the EKR system. I hope I say it correctly, and if not, then probably somebody will comment now. But it's based on primary data. So the idea, if you combine shipment data with fuel data plus energy, you get process data. And that process data all comes back to CO2 per unit. And why is CO2 per unit so interesting? If you know your CO2 per unit, you can see the difference per customer, you can see the difference per country, you can see the differences per supplier, you can see how you are doing compared to others, and you can learn from your own operation. You can also start high level. What do we mean by high level? If you're a logistics company, you know your fuels, you know your electricity, you know your gas, you know everything, and you know your volume. And with that, you can see in the middle under lean and green, it says how much is the emission factor CO2 per unit, and it will calculate the quantities for you. And just by doing it each 6 months, you can put a finger on to see how are we doing, how are we evolving, okay? Now, what's often interesting to hear is how other companies have done this. Looking at the first one, and you might wonder, how do you know so much about this company? I worked there for 8 years and 2 months. I was the director of operations there. And with this company, I achieved 3 stars in lean and green. The first step that, and I often still say we, but I left there 5 years ago, but I still say we because I'm proud of what we did there, is that we reduced the lighting in a warehouse. That came back to a reduction of 60% of electricity. And then the chargers for forklifts and all the internal transport material, we changed that from a low frequency loader to a high frequency loader. And all of a sudden, the total energy bill was 70% less. Then we went to analyze. And we wanted to look at, we all had own trucks. We drove around Holland and Belgium, let's say Benelux, just a circle of 250 kilometers from the south of Holland. And we just traveled there with own trucks, own drivers. We found that some areas we weren't that good at. And it was Mona is a family-owned business, so it was difficult to talk about outsourcing parts of the logistics. But when you make it financial, and you can see that it's sound to outsource some of the transport, that you can reduce kilometers with that. When we started measuring, we found out that an average shipment was 147 kilometers. That reduced back to 121, and now it's 87. If you can, I live in the south of Holland, and then we were shipping goods to the middle of the Netherlands because our logistic company was located there, and they came back to the south again to go to Belgium. If you see that, if you make that financial, if you make that graphical, then you know what you can do with that. To increase to decrease the CO2 per customer, we looked at the load factor. What do we ship to customers? We saw a lot of pallets going to another warehouse that are 1.70 meters or 1.80 meters high. Try to improve that, or double stack, but also the use of eco combis, because Mona Packaging is a packaging company, so the products were light. So you can look at an eco company, so a bigger vehicle. they are at 40%, 47% reduction of emissions as we speak. CHEP, I think most of you will know CHEP. It's a company that helps with loading material like the blue pallets. What they did by looking at their data, they first started with the first star to reduce, to see where they could reduce emissions by improving their load, by looking at frequency of deliveries and so on. But what they found is that their biggest problem was that they had a lot of empty running. And one of the points in that was the third point, they had a bus ride. So each day they made the same trip, and then they hoped that there were pallets to pick up and to bring them back. So they changed their way of working. So they changed their bus route to transport on demand. That means only when a full truckload is ready, then they go and pick it up. And they started doing that by collaborating with companies who were empty at that location. So they were looking for different partners to help them with that. They even put in locations where there's not that much volume, where there's not that much balance, they put cameras on the area where they stack the pallets, and they only went when there are 33 stacks of 16 pallets high and they could see it on camera, then they would pick it up. They're also a third star with a 41% reduction. You always have companies that do it differently. CB is called Central Bookhouse. They ship books. There are 5 million packages of books each year. They just started investing in other modalities and other types of transport. To give you an idea, they started with cargo bikes. So they did inner city logistics, not with cars anymore, but with cargo bikes, some electric, some man-driven. But also green driver program, and they added software to their trucks to see how they drive, how they brake, how they increased speed. And they made their trucks fit to use because they're driving with quite big, heavy trucks, and they have fairly light product to ship. And they invested in electric trucks and LNG trucks, Euro 6 trucks, just to see what worked for them the best. So they invested first, and then they see what happened, what worked for them the best. And the most interesting point is that they were always fighting with their biggest competitor. And CB was really good in the higher volumes and the bigger volumes, and their competitor was good in the really low voltage, the single book. And instead of keep fighting with each other, they went to a collaboration. They joined the program last year, and they already achieved the first star with a reduction of 24% of emissions. Let's talk about beer. Royal Swinkels, they have the brand Bavaria in Holland, but also Swinkels. They started by using inland shipping to go, like barging and short sea, to go to Spain. And there was another benefit of that. By going by boat, there was a bit more inventory because it takes a bit longer to get to the south of Spain. But they were allowed to load 28.5 tons instead of 24 tons because they get a special permit because they use multimodal. They use barging and only the last bit on roads. So they got a special permit. So all of a sudden, they could improve the load by 15% without extra costs. And also optimization based on analysis. They had a simple algorithm that said if you have a full truck going from Holland to France, then we drive it ourselves. And if it's less than a truckload, then we have to outsource it. If you look at it more closely, they could see that the north of France is easy to access from the Netherlands. It's only 200 kilometers. So all of a sudden they went on a different way of looking at it, to look at it from a CO2 point of view, but also to look from a financial point of view, what makes sense to drive yourself or what it makes sense to outsource. Also improvement and collaboration based on facts. If you are together with, if you're in a traditional relationship with your logistics partner as a shipper, then the logistics partner has to reduce cost, reduce money, and save money for the shipper. Swinkels does that different with the house transport. They have a shared saving. So if they save 100 euros, each get 50 euros. So there's a lot of incentive both to be better, to become more lean. And they believe in long-term partnerships. If you want your partner to invest in an electric truck, then give them a contract that helps them with that, like 3 to 5 years, but not very short-term contracts. They're also a third star with 37% of reduction. Tilbeke is an interesting one. It's a family-owned transport company. It has a modern fleet. They replace trucks every 4 years instead what we usually see 6 to 8. They have partly already alternative fuels where it works for them. So they have an electric truck going from 2 DCs where they can charge in between. They have LNG trucks for the longer hauls and some gas and for the distribution. But for me, the biggest benefit of Tilbeke is that they do not only do a pre-calculation to see how much kilometers, how much fuel, how much CO2, how much cost go into a single shipment. They do an after calculation as well. That is something I still find strange with all the companies I've spoken to, is that none of them do an after calculation to see what actually makes sense. So they do it differently. So at the end of the year, they make an overview of their clients. They take into consideration how much money they made from them, what it has cost, and then in a logistics point of view, how many kilometers, how much fuel, how much CO2, and to see what they can do. And for their parcels, they found that they could not do it well themselves. So they started a network with 6 other family businesses and they exchange parcels on a national level. And that increased to also send pallets via the network. So they are a third lean green star. That's quite impressive for a family company. I'm looking quickly at Anita. I'm not sure if there are any questions coming in. No. Okay. Then we will go to some software. In 2016, I made a tour around the lean and green participants. And what we saw there is that for everybody, the calculation and allocating of emissions is quite difficult. And companies were really busy with calculating their emissions instead of working on reduction. And we then started with a few companies that had a request to us. They said our CO2 per liter of milk is going up, or our CO2 per hectoliter of beer is going up. So we would like to see where that's coming from. That was actually in 2016 my first assignment for top sector logistics in the Netherlands, and they said, can you find 5 data sets which we can work with? The reason for that was up to 2014, a lot of the documents on CO2 calculation and allocation have been written, but not in a practical sense. If you give a small to medium business a 100-page document on emissions calculator, they say, thank you, but no, I will not read this is too much. But if you can explain it to them in a 1 page, and you say, hey, we're gonna work with your primary data, from where to where, how much, for who, and a bit of fuel and energy, then all of a sudden they say, hey, that might even work. So what we'll do is, I'll change my screen. Anita, if you could please nod if you now see other, yeah, thank you, very good. What we have done is, we're gonna take you 3 steps, sorry for that. And I'm going to start with the end result, the analysis. We have created a tooling that started with truck transport in the Netherlands, then Benelux, then other modalities, then Europe, then worldwide, and now all modalities are in. For the Dutch Post, we just added a bicycle as well, and a Segway, because they deliver in Amsterdam with a Segway as well. So for us, it's the same, it's just another vehicle. So the idea is that you create a logistics profile that fits your needs, so that is you. I will go through that later on. Then you will get a format which you can fill, and that format you have to validate. You can do that self-service, just drop the Excel in the data validation, and you will get the same data back with some red cells that you have to improve or which is not understood. But first, we'll start with the end result. I have 2 things I would like to show you. For Lean and Green in the Netherlands, we give companies feedback on their emissions. Oh, sorry. Oh. And what you can see here on the left side is how much ton or volume did they ship, what is the total emissions, what is the CO2 per unit, in this case 14.38, how complete is their data, to how many companies you have shipped, or what is the number of shipments. You can also see different types of modalities. For this summary counts, red is not efficient, green is very efficient, and yellow is average. It's always in KPIs, so CO2 per ton, CO2 per ton kilometer. The first one, CO2 per ton, you need to tell to the customer how much CO2 you added to their product, and CO2 per ton kilometer means how efficient could I get it to that customer on a certain day. Just a few examples. If you know what your average emission is, this is your purple line. Oh, sorry. And below there are customers. And then you can see red, yellow, and green. Green's been really efficient. And then it becomes interesting. Do you know why certain customers are more efficient than others? And often if you talk to a company, they know why, in this case, on the left side, Delft, is really high in emissions. So that's so that is good to see. So I got a question coming in. One is in Hungarian, I cannot read that, sorry.
There is a question in English. Can you see that?
Yeah, I see it. Thank you. Thank you. I said the question says, good to see the positive examples.
Yep.
However, how much do you see this green approach is becoming a mainstream in the Netherlands and in Europe? If you ask how much goes on rapidly, what would be the answer being active in green projects? That's a fair question. I think that would be on a good day 10% maybe, because Lean and Green has started as a front runners program, but is becoming mainstream because we started as a front runners program. And what we see now is that a lot of branch organization, and Dutch is that TLN and this Transport and Logistics Netherlands and EVO, they both have combined, I think, 40,000 companies. And they are now introducing it to their companies to become mainstream. So the framework is just ready up to 5 stars. And we got a big push now from Germany, who's going to tax the CO2. So all of a sudden, there's a money value in this. So yes, it was a front runners program, but it's getting mainstream. And what you see more and more is that the Lean and Green brand is all known out throughout Europe. If you look in the Netherlands, 70% of the logistics service provider is part of Lean and Green. If you go to Germany, there are 50 companies that are Lean and Green now. So it's going quite rapidly. So yes, it was front runners, but it's becoming mainstream now. And I think within 2-3 years, it will change big time. I hope that answers your question. If not, please let me know. If you can paint on a map where you are driving on the left side CO2 per ton, you can see this. Some of the dots are red, some are green. If you look to the right side and you look to the United Kingdom, you see a red and green dot next to each other. And then it becomes interesting from a logistics point of view. How is it possible that sometimes we drive there very efficient and sometimes we don't? And if you can answer these kind of questions for you, then it becomes interesting. Then you can save money, because then you start to understand what's going really well and what has to improve. The 10% penetration we could see right now. When do you think it will hit 50%? I think within the coming 5 to maximum 10 years. And why do I say that? Europe has committed to 94%, 49, excuse me, 49, almost, let's say 50% is easier, reduction in 2030. So then it has to be done. I see a lot of countries that say in 2025, the major inner cities have to be emission free or emission low. So what you see now is that when we have fought the coronavirus and that's behind us, then sustainability will become another big priority, as you can see in the Green Deal. So it will improve big time and really quickly. If I look at national law and my neighbors, but if I look at national law, knowing your emissions footprint, monitoring and reduce it will be implemented within 2 years. And then lean and green is one of the checked off ways to do that. Another interesting point is that if you do if you can recalculate your emissions and you do that for several companies, then you can see on the right side the orange dot. The orange dot, that is you. You see about bronze, silver, gold, gold plus. That means data quality. So bronze data means that you work with default numbers for fuel. Silver means a year value. Gold means per month, and gold plus means per trip. It's too much detail for now, but the interesting part is that you can benchmark yourself anonymously to others in the market. So you can look into the neighbor's window with them looking to you. Then I'll jump back again. We have an interactive version as well. Just a second. And what it does is it gives you the same management summary, but the difference is in this case is this is online. It's completely self-service, and you can click down drill on anything you would like to know. So in this case, you see that the total emissions is 13 million kilograms of CO2. And that's nice to know for reporting, but you probably want to know it per customer or per day, or to see where to improve. Again, you see the data completeness and so on, but I'll just show you a few things that it can do. Let's look at the emissions. Below you can see the customer. On the left side, you see the total emissions, and on the right side, you see the legend of how which modalities are used. Let's say that you want to look at a customer, but you can also look at a carrier, at a country, modalities, other weeks, even a license plate to see which truck has driven it. So you can down drill to almost anything. But first you make a head selection on customer, and then you can filter on all points of data that you've put in here. This is a test data set, but when you fill this, you can click down drill on it. Then you can see at the top 20 emissions, the flows, the energy, how the flows are going. So let's say that you're looking at different types of modalities to see how is it going. You can see, let's say for barge, from where to where, which type of modality. But what I wanted to show you is, if you say for this company, and you say I want to compare 2017 by 2018 in the month February, from Netherlands to the Netherlands, all of a sudden there's only 3 shipments left. And then if you select details, you can see the actual trip number, the customer names, the postal codes, the volumes, the emissions. So all of a sudden you go from your total emissions within 5 mouse clicks to a few shipments. So it should help you identify where you can improve and where you have to improve. I just want to show you one more and then I'll go through to the next one. CO2 pricing is getting interesting. If we see in Germany, I'll set the price on 25 euros, it's 25 euros per ton. You can see in this case, the cost below is 343,000 euros. It's going up to 65 euros per ton in Germany. Then it will cost almost 900,000 euros. And all of a sudden, then it becomes really interesting. We have recalculated that for a company with 100 trucks, cost them roughly 200,000 per year, each year. Often that is the net profit of a company. And if you work with primary data, you're reducing cost and you can show what the impact is per customer. Probably you will have something to talk about with your customer to reduce emissions, to reduce cost, to prevent extra cost in the future. I can talk about this for hours, but I won't. I want to show you 2 more things if I can. Creating a logistics profile. Each company is different. Each company is differently organized. Each company manages their data differently. So what we try to do is ask them questions about what type of company are you? If you want to include transport and location, what you know about your cargo, about your energy, about your fuel, and some extra. I will go through it quickly also because of time, but let's say I'm a transport company that does pallet transport in Hungary with no subcontractors, and I want to report about data from a year. And we already said we transport in pallets, but we also have tons or kilos or cubic meters. So the mostly it's tons. I'll just add that. And you have a IT or a TMS system to provide that information to you. And then what do you know about how much you traveled from where to where? Often it's postal code and country, but it also can be geo coordinates. It can be rail terminals, but also the city name if you do not have the other information. And then you get the question, if you're on truck transport, you know per stop how much you deliver, or else you cannot invoice your customer. So you probably know how much pallets that you have delivered. And let's say you're a trucking company, then you know your liters of fuel. It's an actual figure because there's an invoice for that. Let's say that you use diesel and you use LNG. And you have the data available for fuel per month. You don't have it by licensing degree. It's not broken down. And then you can choose some extra fields or just select 2 to let you see how it works. And now we're finished. So it took us a couple of minutes. You can save which selection you have made. Then you submit the form and it generates an Excel sheet. You can also share with CSV. You can also send with an API, with an automated connection. But to start with, this works fine. And I'll put it a bit bigger on the screen. And here you can see an assignment number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a month like May, a date 1/5/2020, how much ton, from where, to where, for which customer. And here are the 2 extra fields I just selected. And here you can add your fuel, cost again in May, diesel, 1,500 liters. So we always make a joke about this. If you fill in the answers correctly and honestly, you will get a format that fits your need, which you can easily fill. And if not, then you have to go to the questions again and have a look at it again. When you fill that data, you go to data validation. and you can just drag it to there. And by dragging it there, it will do it takes up to 10 minutes to check on how your data is looking at. So how complete is the data? Do you understand the links in the data? And are there any outliers? And with that, you can choose one of the two products, either the interactive analysis, which I just shown you there, or the PowerPoint analysis that I've shown you. So that's the two different types of reporting. That brings me to the end of the presentation. So any questions or suggestions or answers, maybe that's what I prefer, but answers is good as well.
Thank you, Leon. Actually, there is one question in the chat.
I saw it come in. Thank you. Thank you. Do you see a change in people's minds toward the approach of green, or is it just CO2 pricing to avoid and comply with regulations? Good question, fair question. I think there's, if you look at the front runners, they just see it because of CO2. They want to reduce their footprint. You have another front runners that do it because of being green, to hand over the world better to their children or grandchildren. So these for me are the front runners. They do that because they want to create a better world. Then there's a huge part that just thinks it's doing sound business to become more lean and become more green because they want to increase their competitiveness. They want to stay there. They want to keep a business also in next year because you have to make money to be there in the future as well. And there's a small group coming up now that are just want to avoid CO2 pricing or prevent 8% price increase on fuel. So I think the mainstream is just that it's good business to be efficient, and with being efficient becoming more green. And you have the front runners to do it from their own ambition. Yeah, and then a small portion that just try to avoid taxes, which is also a good motivator. I hope that answers your question.
So we have still 4 minutes up to 10:30. So if there's any new questions, then please put it on chat. Meanwhile, I will put a question, and
yes.
I use that I am the moderator, so I can break the rules. So I put it in in words, my question. I can see that companies, logistic providers, manufacturers, retailers can join or could join the platform, but do you have any special institution or organizations that are part of Lean and Green, and they are not from these company types like logistic provider? What I mean, for instance, if I'm a mayor and I have a city, can the city join, for instance?
It's a good question. We have, to answer the first part of the question, if I just look at the Dutch participants, there are 243 participants in Holland. 45% of them is logistics service provider. 45% is producers or shippers, and roughly 10% is retail. And retail for us is supermarket and so on, because there's a different type of doing business. But we also have, I think, 8 or 9 inner cities that are part of Lean and Green. Like the city of Amsterdam is a huge ambassador for Lean and Green. So yes, they can. It all depends on what their scope is. I have seen ports in harbor. I've seen become part of Lean and Green. That's a small community as well. I've seen inner city who do their facility and everything, what they take into scope. So it all comes down to yes, they can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
We
have still 2 minutes left.
Oh yes, I got a question. Is it possible to contact you at some point after the seminar? Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. David can share my contact details with you for sure. Yeah.
Yep, of course.
Leon, you advocated LNG truck. What I was very much liked, Lean and Green Europe is doing any advocacy work to push bio LNG developments. I think bioenergy is even more important because if you look at the emissions point of view, bioenergy is way much better. What we're gonna in Holland what we want to do, we want to become a voice to Brussels. We are now 13 countries. There will be added some more countries this year. We have over 500 companies in our network. I think we could be a voice in Brussels, and that is something we're going to set up with a European organization. We just made the decision a couple of months ago with all our 13 national hosts that we're going to set up a European organization. We're in the final stage of that. I expect in Q3 of this year that it will be set up. And then we will advocate bioenergy and all initiatives that reduce emissions or help us to make the next step. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we just reached the end. It's 10:30, and I know Leon will need to leave because he's going to have another meeting. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank Leon for your participation and for your presentation. I think we could learn a lot. And of course, I can only urge companies later on to join the Hungarian program, because that will be an ideal opportunity to meet Leon later on as well, because I think that's the beauty of international collaboration, that we can utilize the knowledge of people, of experts like Leon, for instance. So again, thank you very much, Leon, and thank you very much for your attention in this first part. Now we will leave for a 10-minute long break, and we will come back 10:40, and we will follow up with the second part of the agenda, which will be just for the sake of change in Hungarian. So thank you very much for your participation, for the presentation, and then we see each other at 10:40. Tehát 10:40-kor várjuk vissza a kedves résztvevőket, hogy folytassuk a második részét a workshopnak. Az előadóknak köszönjük szépen az előadást, és akkor 10:40-kor immáron magyarul folytatnánk. Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Leon.
Bye-bye. See you in Hungary. Bye.
Yeah.